link that I can.
Yeah, if you could. So, folks, going to go ahead and open this up a little bit early. Some of our attendees haven't shown up yet, but want to go ahead and give you guys some opportunities to prep your questions, get them into the channel, let us see how they're going. You know, and talk about what's going on. So right now, you got the two of us. You got me, I'm running for U.S. Senate. Joseph Morrison, he is running for U.S. Congress, Congressional District 1. Now, go ahead and comment. We can both see in. Hopefully, some of our other attendees will show up as we continue to move on in through the questions. We are hoping for Justin Plant, candidate for governor, to show up here soon. Is interesting. 6:30. Try and be sharp. So, how you doing tonight, Joseph? Joe? I mean, we've done this once already.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, I'm doing good. It is a lot of stress out there with everything going on. But it feels like the belt is tightening,
Right.
if you will, and especially with the gas prices going up, or I'm kind of thinking more or less of like, take the motorcycle a little bit more, or maybe not go out to adventure as much this summer for lake time or jet skis, stuff like that.
Right.
It's going to need to tighten the belt a little bit more as we move forward, I think.
Well, I mean, that's a big thing. Once we get into the process of removing, some 20 to 40% of the global oil supply from circulation, it takes a bit of a hit. Regardless of how you feel about the war, that is a real impact of what's going on right now with regards to Iran and Israel and the way they're interacting in the Gulf with regards to, each other's oil production, gasoline production. We've seen Israel attack Iran's fields, joint fields with Qatar. And in retaliation, Iran's come back and hit several places, several of their neighbors, Bahrain, Israel, Qatar as well, and a couple others. So we're looking at supply chain issues with regards to fuel, globally right now. Yeah, the U.S. may not be taking oil directly from the Strait of Hormuz, but, when
it all plays into each other. It really does. It is a global economy and global market for a reason. We do lean on each other in a lot of ways for everything in that regards. To have such an amount, because we say 20%, but to quantify that is 20% of the world's market, not just our market or anything like that. That's massive.
Yeah, I mean, it is the global market, and taking 20% out of the global market means that people who were reliant on that are now looking to us to help shore up their power supply, their gasoline supply. Mm-hmm. It makes it a real interesting dynamic watching the market fluctuate that much because of straight up supply and demand issues.
Yeah, it is. It's a, and there's so many issues, in my opinion, when we're looking at that Middle Eastern question with Iran, Israel, Gulf states, everything in there. I think we're out over our skis on it. I really do. I don't think we had enough forethought to move forward with it.
Well, and that's interesting. I got another conversation coming up next week, which will probably lead into a lot of that. What we're doing with foreign policy, what we're doing with our relationship with Israel. We've already seen an awful lot of changes in the last 24 hours simply because of issues with the administration, as well as what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz and the entire Gulf region. It's just crazy. And, for me, my particular opponent, Jim Rich, has been sitting on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee for, 10, 12 years now. These is something he specifically should have been very aware of, should have been interested in making sure that this didn't happen or didn't proceed this particular way. Yet here we are, they say it's going to end, but we've heard that before, haven't we?
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. In 2003, when they did the mission accomplishment with Iraq, we've been in these forever wars and we've spent a lot of money, time, energy, effort in the Middle East specifically. I think a lot of our consciousness, our forethought, our problems come from our dealings in foreign relationships. I feel like in our current society, it takes up 75 to 80% of daily conversations, where in reality it should be a finite thing. We shouldn't be consumed with what's going on the other side of the globe, in my
No.
opinion. And I feel like
Well, and this goes into one of those issues that we've talked about several times before is, what are we doing with all the money that we're sending to foreign countries? Why are we spending that much money, and what is it actually doing for us, successfully?
right.
And we just don't have that. It's not here. It's not happening. The money's all going over there. We're suffering with our infrastructure. We're suffering with our medical, our education system, and we've managed to strip mine the middle class of just about everything that they've been able to put together over the last 40 years.
Right.
What
Yeah.
are we doing that is truly an American first perspective in this entire thing? It's, we talk about those things. We talk about make America great again. We talk about, make America healthy again. We talk about America first. We talk about all of these things that are supposed to be about bringing things back to America, reshoring industry, reshoring labor, getting jobs for our children, particularly getting jobs for our children who have just spent, 50 to 100K for a college education, just
Right.
for it to be outsourced to somebody with an associate's degree in India.
Exactly. And I know this is sometimes an issue as well with like H-1Bs coming in over from India and other places, and a brain drain on them. So these are just all issues that are intertwined into each other of how are we really helping our populace versus outsourcing to the cheapest buyer.
Yeah.
I do feel like that is a problem in our society. Of part of my reason for like reshoring and stuff like that is a lot of times these corporations and companies will take their manufacturing, buy land in China or a third world country somewhere. They're enriching that place because then they're building their manufacturing base there, industrializing that country.
Yeah.
All the while you're taking jobs, construction jobs, everything from American people and giving it to the lowest bidder, essentially. And that that's one of those pieces that I would really like to address, and I'd really like to find a solution for that. Of how are we going to correct that? To me, there is a solution. We do need to bring back the manufacturing, and just I think letting smaller businesses rise up is one of the more practical solutions that we could use for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead, take a look at what we got. You had some questions prepared ahead of time, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we got with those. So let's see. Yeah, most of these are some that we sort of covered. So now you and I are both running for federal seats. Okay, this is what we're going to be doing in Washington, D.C. with relationship to what's happening here in Idaho, what we're doing in Washington in order to improve the livelihood, improve the lifestyles of Idahans. So it's not like we can talk about what we can do is, the governor, which would have been nice to have Justin here tonight, or even as an Idaho legislator. But what can we do in Washington to address some of these issues? See, one of your first questions here is how to make housing more affordable, not only for us, but for our children.
Right. I saw some piece of legislation today. I didn't look fully into it, but it looked like they were pushing to be able to rezone some houses for more starter homes, and that is definitely a piece that I is uh, to me a big thing. We need to be able to provide affordable housing for these kids, and I do see the mansions going up everywhere. Every time I drive by these places, it looks like 500,000 $1 million homes, and then not only that, but getting those corporations outside of these single family residences. And like I've said before, Donald Trump did sign an executive order saying that BlackRock and Blackstone companies like that, asset managers, wouldn't be allowed to buy. It's about pushing to get codification of that to law. That's where the problem arises, because you're going to have to get a majority of the Congress on board with that. But that would be definitely a focal point for me.
Right. So this isn't like dealing with 105 legislators here in the state of Idaho, but we're talking about federal.
Right.
So Blackstone, BlackRock, yes, these are international movers. They're traded on the New York Stock Exchange. They have foreign investors,
Hmm.
who are part of the system, and they've come in as an asset manager and just started up buying houses. And they didn't even necessarily restrict themselves to just the starter homes, but just property in general. So yeah, we definitely need to get the asset managers out, because that's kind of an antitrust.
Hmm.
We've gone in and allowed them to commoditize, essential life things that we need in order to live. They've commoditized it. It's now on the stock exchange. It's now on the commodities exchange. We now have the SEC controlling the flow of housing in the United States. We talk about the number of vacant houses for the number of homeless on a
Hmm.
regular basis in different circles. Why are there 10 vacant houses for every homeless person? Uh, Regardless of how you feel about that, that's not a small statistic.
Right.
So how do we get the prices down to where it's affordable so that those individuals who are struggling, who are on the edge, are no longer on the edge? Because that's a big thing, always being one paycheck away from bankruptcy, being
Right.
one paycheck away from homelessness, being one emergency situation from being evicted. So again, you're right. I see BlackRock, Blackstone as being a huge issue in getting them out of the housing market, and we need to stop incentivizing, cities and states to continue to zone and increase property prices.
Right.
Work on getting the cost of building the homes, because like you said, zoning is a huge issue.
Hmm.
Uh, Permitting is a huge issue. Every one of these things continue to drive the cost of a building up. So how do we get back to the starter homes you and I grew up in?
I, I and that kind of ties into the manufacturing as well. Um, we need to be able to start making things here in Idaho, lumber, everything, and like everything in that nature, to be able to build the homes from home, if you will. Uh, build make it make it more affordable to lumber and get these products made inside of the state. is I would say where I think that would go for me. And then yeah, because there is a lot of costs that are included with inspections, everything like that. Uh, I do feel like it is exorbitant amount, and like you were saying, there are 10 empty houses to every homeless person or something like that. We should be fire selling those as it shouldn't be allowed to just sit empty as long as a well place to live. Um, yeah, I think auctioning some of those properties off and really trying to rebalance the market for what people can afford.
Hey, so we got Justin here. Hi, Justin. How are you doing?
Oh, just barely got home from work. Got tied up fixing a machine. I apologize, guys. It
It's
was
quite all
it was
right.
a busy day.
So we're in the middle of this right now. One of the things we're talking about is cost of housing.
All
Now,
right.
Joe and I were talking about the issues related to, housing costs and how we can affect those in Washington, D.C., like the role of BlackRock and Blackstone in commoditizing housing, issues like the EPA and the Chevron deference preventing us from reforesting wilderness land and being able to manage the lumber on it, restoring forestry, restoring lumber production native here to the state of Idaho so that we're not shipping wood and timber and lumber from other states, other nations even. Get rid of the concept where we're selling, raw product to China, where China just takes it 14 miles offshore, processes it on a ship and sells it back to us. What can we do now from your position as governor, knowing
Yeah.
that that's the role you would be playing? What sort of things do you see as a benefit in that position that you could do as governor in order to reduce the cost of housing?
Well, most of the things that I found that the governor can do is really just cut a lot of the red tape for strict permitting, so that everything's a faster timeline on construction, waiting for permits, stuff like that. Cut all the, not all, but cut the red tape down to manageable, which would streamline it, getting rid of a lot of the bureaucracy, which a lot of that waiting times and stuff like that inflates prices of houses later down the road when they get finished getting built. So that's something like the governor can do in office, like day one. Another thing is I've been thinking about is responsibly developing underutilized public lands. So like lands that are just sitting there not doing nothing, like nobody wants to go camp on them. They're just collecting weeds. Go ahead and open it up for housing or for like shelters, VA stuff, open some of the land that's not being used. Nobody wants to go visit and actually, use part of it. Yeah, so as for like just local things the governor can do, there's not a lot. A lot of it is just incentivizing a speedier process, getting the permitting done so that houses can be built timely and without delay and further cost.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I mentioned was the Chevron deference with regards to the EPA and the way we manage forest lands. BLM, Idaho Wilderness Lands, the lands Idaho owns versus the lands, federally managed and owned, making sure that we can open those back up to multi-use and production again, getting lumber back in, getting reforestation projects so that we have lumber to harvest from those mountain ranges from the previously forested before they all got burnt out. You know, working at things from that particular angle. One, to make housing materials cheaper, more affordable. Another, putting Idahoans to work actually harvesting the lumber to bring it back in, to build their houses with, and overall reduce the cost of at least all of those products internally, as long as we can keep them off of the commodities exchange in Chicago, because that's where we lose an awful lot of our possible profit and our affordable infrastructure, is the fact that all of those are commodities that are traded in Chicago with middlemen who never see what they buy or sell. They buy cheap, they sell high, and they're making a fortune off of the people who are doing the lumber, doing the forestry work, and the people that are doing the construction, because they're cheating both sides.
Yeah. I would love to see us reforest and have really open the sawmills back up, get us back to producing. So yeah, I'm big into forestry and like getting us back online. I would like to see us take back a lot of the BLM and federal funded land back into state control so that we can control it more locally. Because I think, to me, somebody in the federal government that's not out here probably doesn't have the same idea how I'd want to monitor my backyard as they want to monitor theirs there. So I think if we can get some of the BLM land and federal land back under state control, we'd have a far greater chance of being able to utilize our forests, reforest it, cut new timber, reforest, almost like you do in farming, only with tree production.
Yeah. So this one's a good way to segue into one of the other questions, and that is the issue of public lands here in the state of Idaho. Because as we've talked about, we have a variety of different lands that fall under different zones, different approaches. Some of it's federally owned land, some of it's state-owned land, some of it's jointly managed through both. And then we also have a significant amount of private land, which has been made available for public use through certain organizations, nonprofits, as well as private. You're seeing more of this land become accessible. Now, Joe and I talked about this last time. There is a joint resolution that Idaho Senator Ben Adams has been trying to get through as a constitutional amendment, and that is the ability or the requirement that the state of Idaho cannot sell any of the land that's given to them, any of the public land, except under very specific situations, making the process of selling it significantly more difficult than it has been in the past. Now, Joe and I both being at the federal level, if we were to receive those federal seats, and wanting to make sure that Idahoans have public access to those public lands. How would you feel as governor supporting Ben Adams' particular approach to securing public lands for public use in perpetuity for the state of Idaho?
Well, I'm going to have to say I have not looked at that plan at all. So without a little further investigation, I don't know exactly how that's written. I've been doing a lot of research, trying to learn everything, and I just haven't got there yet. As for public lands, I think they should stay public, like I said, other than like underutilized public lands, like I said, like a lava field that nobody ever goes and wanders around in. There's nothing to camp there for, no water, blah, blah, blah. I think we should be able to sell that kind of property off, especially if we can turn it into a shelter or VA, for the VA or houses, because we're always trying to, create more houses, and it seems to be farmland, at least what I see. So I'd rather sell some of the public lands that, like I said, just nobody wants to go to. They just collect weeds. Yeah, so like I said, I'd have to do a lot more research and actually read the bill that he's put in. Unfortunately, I've been looking a lot into immigration and a whole bunch of other hot topics. So I'm not fortified on that yet, but all it takes is a little research. And as I make notes here, I will make sure I get on top of that one as well.
Yeah, nice. So Travis has a question here. And what land is that? People that don't want to visit, allegedly, we're going to be building cheap houses there. Travis, one of the things was 3 years ago during the mayoral race for Boise, that issue was actually brought up. Where were they going to expand Boise city limits in order to, build housing, build additional housing, and make affordable housing within Boise city limits in order to help with immigration issues. And one of the things is bring it in close to Boise. They were talking out southeast of Boise, between here and Mountain Home, which is largely scrubland. It's desert. Not a lot of natural water out there, which means you're looking at piping water in if you want, grass, if you want greenery. But this is pretty much sister communities to what Micron has built out there for the Micron campus. It would be lands like that are in close to established cities so that the new people have a support network, not necessarily ones where we're going in and building brand new communities, in the middle of the Frank Church Wilderness area. I think, but again, all depends on who's in charge of that plan, Travis, and what the options are coming out of that and who's going to get control of that as things develop. Now, Justin, one of the things you talked about was immigration. And it's a huge topic right now in the state of Idaho. What are we doing for immigration with regards to, where do you as governor see your role in Idaho immigration and making sure that as many Idahoans as possible, whether they're here temporary as residents, or whether or not they should even be here, how are we keeping them employed? How are we keeping them fed? How are we keeping them in the state? What are some of the solutions you see?
All right. So obviously no blanket immunity, or, you can't just say, yep, you're all legally here. That's out the window. I don't like it. The big thing is hopefully we get some guys up in the federal government that can help the process in getting a good, productive worker to be able to become naturalized. Speeding that process up for some of them would be awesome. Definitely we need to get rid of, and yes, they're all lawbreakers, but getting rid of the ones that are running drugs, bringing in drugs, gangs, that kind of association should be just immediately gotten rid of. They're not productive to our society. Like we're in Idaho, a lot of ag, and they've used immigrants for so long. And up until here recently, nobody really had an eye on it. You know what I mean? So we can't just all of a sudden tomorrow go, you know what? That's it. We're rounding them all up. They're all gone, even though they're here working, being productive. filling jobs that don't necessarily want to be taken by a regular citizen. I don't know why, but that seems to be a consensus of how they get the job. So what we have to do is we have to get some ways to fill the positions before we send them all back. One of them is work programs through the Department of Corrections. Work off your stay. There's more to dairies than hanging milkers on udders. I've worked for dairies when I first moved out here as a mechanic. So, I was fixing manure spreaders, fixing silage cutters, building free stalls. So welding, mechanics, pump works, electrical, hanging lights, redoing lighting in the parlors, plumbing, pipe fitting. I mean, I did all sorts of stuff for that guy. Went out, fixed his pivots, because I was working for him as a mechanic / hand. So, a lot of that, I learned a whole lot being a kid just out of high school and college. So there's a lot there that we can, I think, build into a potential way of rehabilitating inmates. Obviously, I'm not talking, violent murders, that kind of thing. Your basic petty theft or something like that, where they get a good prison term. Non-violent offenders, that kind of thing. We already have it. I think we easily expand that without a whole lot of increased taxes or anything. It's just an expansion of that, which I think actually then brings that back into the community by having a better field of workers. And, heck, maybe it's somebody that never tried farming and falls in love with it, and they have a full-time career for the rest of their life instead of going back to jail. My other thought on that is able-bodied people on our health and welfare program. So if you're able to work, I think you should be able to fill those positions quite easily, as long as you're, fully able to work, or even as a part-time worker, help take the burden off of our health and welfare system. Again, you don't have to just go milk the cows. We could set up different programs with the farmers, with stuff where they're learning welding or electronics or whatever. And I think we could actually build some profitable programs out of that for the people, the community, and our farms.
Yeah. So one of the reference points is Idaho has something like about 6.5% of the population is reliant on our health and welfare system. Okay. Our SNAP programs, our health and welfare, our women and children assistance. And I'm not going to say Medicare and Medicaid, because we know that number is higher simply because of the number of people existing in the poverty zone. So Joe, from a federal level, we're talking immigration and jobs.
So that is one of those heavy things with the with the immigration question, is the jobs that the immigrants do take. I do feel like we can do a immigration type of reform, more so of allowing these people to come in and work, summer programs, stuff like that. And I also agree with that. We need to be pushing our young men, our Gen X or Gen Z, and everybody to work as well. It is one of those things where if I'm attacking immigration, I'm looking at the head of the snake, looking at the corporations. We need to start actually finding them for hiring these illegal immigrants and not taking the proper steps. I don't see the people as much of an issue unless, with the heinous crimes, murder, gangbangers, stuff like that. but a lot of times, first illegal entry is a misdemeanor. I don't think they should be treated as felons. And I also agree a lot with like work release programs, and that is also a good idea. I don't think there would be much of a tax burden, to be honest with you, from a work release program, because those farmers are going to pay the private corporations of the prisons. So there shouldn't need to be a tax burden from us to allow these nonviolent prisoners to work on a farm or a dairy, in my opinion. So it'd just be an added benefit for them, and they they get paid. The prisoners get paid. But all in all, I do think that there needs to be immigration reform. I am a huge fan of the secure border. I love hearing about zero illegal immigrants coming in every month. It's like only 3 got in this month, or some small number. I'm like, yes, like that's good for me. I like that. I do think that we should take more of a intelligent, crime inspired, investigative approach to immigration enforcement.
Okay. Now, Joe, you're actually running for the House seat and of course, the House has the power of the purse. From a financial perspective, do you see yourself voting for bills funding some of these security measures?
Are you talking in regards to like DHS? I really would like to cut the federal budget as much as we can. I would like to really analyze a lot of what we actually spend on, and I think that we're spending a lot of money in a lot of different places. And I've been over this a little bit with like the military industrial complex. We have $1.7 trillion budget in there. To me, we're going to need to really analyze what that money is being spent on. I would say I would give the same answer is for any federal funding. We need to analyze what this money is actually going for. They throw out these huge like $93 billion. What is that actually being spent on? Are we getting our money's worth for that, or are we just filling some billionaire's pocket? In my opinion,
And that's actually an interesting discussion. Reason why is because an awful lot of the incentives for making things more criminal or make more things criminal is the fact that the federal government continues to support various prison systems, various jail systems. We give Ada County jails federal money right now based on the number of people that they keep in the jail. The more beds that are filled, the more bunks that are filled, the more federal subsidies the Ada County Sheriff gets as a result. So we continue to see an overcriminalization of nonviolent behavior simply because the state or the federal government has incentivized the states to spend money to break up families. Which of course puts people more dependent upon the SNAP programs. So this comes back around to how do we keep people employed? And most of it is get the government's thumb off the scale.
I agree.
If we're not incentivizing bad behavior of state and municipal governments, which in a lot of these cases is what it is, because they're gaming the system. They want to get maximum federal dollars. So they cheat, they misrepresent, they overcriminalize in order to keep that money flowing in. Meanwhile, it's disrupting families, it's disrupting individual liberties, over nonviolent behaviors. So, like you pointed out, Joe, it's about the incentives. It's where are we spending the money, and is the money actually benefiting the communities it's being spent in, as opposed to just the individuals who are getting rich off of the contracts the jail has with the county, or the contracts the prisons have, or in some cases, we export an awful lot of prisoners because the 10,000 prisoners held by the state of Idaho, we only have beds for 8,000 of them. Currently we have 2,000 that are in beds in other states. And these are the nonviolent criminals, because the private prisons won't take the violent ones. And we are sending them down to Arizona, where their family can't support them, where their family can't see them. They're sitting in a private prison down there, rather than working on a farm here in Idaho, rather than working through one of our meatpacking plants, rather than working some other job, prison forced fires, or forced firefighters. One of those things that Kamala Harris got into trouble for a couple of years ago. How can we make sure that these options are available and that we can keep these people prisoners, nonviolent, in Idaho, where they have the support of their family, their network, and looking at the decriminalization process of several of these crimes that there's very little reason to be in. Now, that actually comes into a segue here. So David Draper here has a question, believes in personal choice and no adult should be able to tell another what they can safely consume. How do you three consider the illegality of cannabis acceptable or unacceptable, even though the lies and misinformation was used to make it illegal? Joe, let's go ahead and you kick that off, considering we're looking at probably some federal rules right now with regards to cannabis and Schedule 1 versus 3.
Right. I guess I'm blanking. Schedule 1, it made it less criminal, correct?
No, Schedule 1 is the most criminal.
Okay.
So Schedule 1 is there is no medical use for it whatsoever, and which takes it off the market legally in any way, shape, or form. Now, Schedule 3 recognizes that there is medical use for cannabis, and it allows a prescription basis to be developed so that you can receive a prescription and be able to use it. And of course, there's an awful lot of argument out there for just straight up descheduling it altogether, since it is a plant, it is natural. Where do you feel from a congressional level, federal level?
So I like the move to make it Schedule 3 that President Donald Trump signed an executive order for that. And I do think that it should be decriminalized across the board, across the federal level. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think that our government has its hands in that I don't think that it needs to have its hands in. And that is just one of those things that I think our government has its hands in that it doesn't need to have its hands in. It makes the prison systems, tickets, everything that snowballs from this illegalization of marijuana. I think it's a big hassle, and I don't think the government should have its hands in it, to be honest with you.
Justin, as governor, how would you see the state legalization or maintain the criminalization for cannabis?
That would really depend on our legislatures and how they would pass the law. As a governor, I probably would not veto a well-written law for medical marijuana or medical cannabis. I've done quite a bit of research into it, being I've never been into any kind of drugs. I've always been a beer guy. So actually, my wife and campaign manager, we've studied quite a bit, and there are so many better uses for that plant than there are for any kind of opioid, synthetic opioids, that kind of stuff. I think a natural plant is a better way to go about that. And where Idaho is one of the last holdout states, making it medically legal, we can tax it, which all that does is keep the money that's already going to it, going to Oregon or Nevada or Montana. We're surrounded. Every port you leave, you can just pick it up as soon as you get across, pretty much. So I don't see why we aren't going ahead and using that money to help fix our education system, fix our healthcare system. I mean, as long as the law would be written where it's effective for Idahoans, I would not veto a bill.
Okay, so David, Donna, both of you have mentioned here cannabis, and now you're familiar with me. I've been a cannabis activist for the last 10 years. Been working on various medical cannabis or even decriminalization of personal use quantities, for different reasons. Availability, being able to get access, being able to make sure people aren't going to prison or ending up in significant stints in jail over simple possession. That said, the Schedule 3, from a federal perspective, which is where I'll be sitting, I see as the right path forward, as a nation, not necessarily as a state. Reason why is because that allows the medical and research facilities across the United States to actually review, study, and understand what is going on with the plant. That way we can debunk, a lot of the misinformation, a lot of the lies about what's going on, better understand those individuals who have a genetic predisposition towards either misuse, substance abuse related to cannabis, or other bad reactions. We talk an awful lot about how cannabis in and of itself, in its use, has never actually killed anybody, unlike several other drugs. Currently, kratom is being discussed in the Idaho State Legislature because of its addictive properties, and that some people have died from withdrawals as a result. But we want to be able to study it, schedule it in a way that we can study it, and actually find solid US-based research that supports cannabis as medicine, beyond what it's already being used as. Be able to research it, being able to access it. And of course, from a medical perspective, we still see the advantage of its use for right to try, and that anybody should be able to have access to right to try under either a research capacity or under a physician's guidance. So we're still working under a control atmosphere where we put in guardrails on the use, so that we're seeing it actually as a medical rather than a recreational substance until such a time as the information says that we should consider it, maybe downgrading it or otherwise. And the thing is that's not just cannabis for me. That's psilocybin, ayahuasca, ketamine. Now we already use methadone, and we have ketamine clinics here in the state of Idaho. Psilocybin is being used in Oregon right now and a couple other places. We're looking at people who are doing medical, trying to think of the word here for it, but basically traveling in order to get medical treatment where that treatment is legal. So we travel to Oregon in order to get treatment in a ketamine clinic, or treatment in a psilocybin clinic, or treatment in a clinic otherwise where it's supervised. One of the other things that we're talking about right now, ibogaine, and several of its protocols have been used in Mexico and Brazil effectively for post-traumatic stress disorder, for trauma-related disorders, and so on. So we're looking at getting those on Schedule 3 as well, so that we can bring them in and study the protocols here in the U.S. Texas has already passed legislation, and I believe Missouri as well. So right to try for veterans, to actually be treated in the U.S. rather than having to travel to Mexico in order to get treated with established protocols in places where it's at least accessible in a reasonably regulated environment, supervised. Now, you talk about the money that we're currently spending in other states. That was brought up by both of them. Idaho is currently spending about $4 to $4.5 million a week in border town dispensaries. $2.5 million into Ontario itself, just from the population of Treasure Valley. That's Ada County, Canyon County, and some of the other ones. That is not a small amount of money for an industry. 10% of Oregon's legal sales came from sales to Idahoans every year for the last 5 years now. So there is a market. It is in Idaho. It is accessible by Idahoans, and they cannot talk to their physicians about their use of it. They can't talk to their family about their use of it because they're acquiring it in a state where it's legal and using it here in Idaho where it's criminal. So this is another area where we need to look at what constitutes right to try, medical access, prescription. As Justin brought up, make sure our legislators have codified it properly in Idaho law so that we have guardrails for most of these psychedelic medicines that are currently being used around the world to help heal people and help them recover from significant trauma. Let me see what else we got here. Let's see. So that was... Okay, so that's what we're looking at from a medical freedom perspective, especially with regards to psychoactive drugs, especially with HJR4 coming up on the November ballot. So for those of you who aren't familiar with HJR4, it is a constitutional amendment that adds onto Idaho Constitution's limitations on who can legislate alcohol. So right now, when it comes to alcohol, the Idaho State Legislature is the only one that can write legislation. You can't do a citizens initiative for beer. Okay? It has to be the state legislature. Now, HJR4 puts an amendment on that section that means that the legislature is the only body that can submit legislation. It makes the initiative process, the citizens initiative process, unavailable for the legalization of psychoactive medicines, psychoactive plants. Now, again, I've talked about that: ayahuasca, ketamine, psilocybin, all of those. That's a health freedom perspective that we talk about. Are you your brother's keeper? What are you doing to allow him access or prevent his access? Now, one of the other things that keeps coming up on a regular basis with regards to medical freedom, especially for women, is abortion rights. And what that means federally, Joe, and what it means here in the state, Justin. Joe, let's go ahead and take it with you here first. Abortion rights at the federal level.
I mean, abortion rights at the federal level. I'm a big fan of revoking Roe v. Wade and allowing it back to the states. I do think that the people should be making the answers for that. And that's I don't think it should be written by legislation. Just like I don't think it should be written by legislation for the federal level. I don't think it should be written by legislation for the state level. I think that in that regards, it should be the people's choice, and a lot more as well. Doctors' advice. We should listen to doctors, and right now in Idaho, we do have a lot of doctors leaving, and that's one of the main reasons.
Okay, Justin, as governor of the state, with regards to abortion access, especially with the Citizens Initiative going through right now, the Citizens Initiative from Idahoans United for Women and Children, which is essentially an abortion access initiative, that is likely to pass. And all it really does is restore a pre-Dobbs ruling here in the state of Idaho, giving physicians access or the privilege to make a judgment call without being second guessed by the Idaho AG or the Idaho legislature. Knowing that you'll probably be seeing that on the ballot in November. And if you're elected, when you're elected governor, you'll probably be seeing the state legislature determine whether or not they want to go ahead and veto it. How do you see your role as the Idaho governor next year when that comes to fruition?
Well, I believe in Trump's stance. Definitely states' right to decide amongst the people how they want their abortion laws in the state. Personally, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother. Other than that, I really don't have a lot more to say on that subject. I'd have to see the laws that they put in, but that's my stance on abortion, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay. So the folks out there, if you've listened to that, so Roe v. Wade, even who is the Supreme Court Justice? Ruth Ginsburg, said that the Roe v. Wade ruling was flawed. And what that came down to was essentially the privacy of the physician and his right to client doctor privilege that would prevent the investigation from pursuing him and investigating him for performing an abortion on a woman. Rather than whether or not a woman had the right to make the call in and of herself. Her body, her choice. It's one of those things that we hear from the Democrats on a regular basis. And you start taking a look at the perspective of what that means with regards to property rights and the Idaho and the Idaho Constitution. The right to life, liberty, acquisition and protection of property, and continuing to go on. So Roe v. Wade was a bad call and needed to be overturned. The Dobbs ruling overturned that aspect. Now, what we haven't done is come back around and revisited that with a counter to the Dobbs, looking at whether or not a woman has the right to choose how her body is used, even if that usage is by the child. Now, Idaho has always been a choose life state, in my opinion. Regardless of whatever the situation was, women in the state of Idaho, more often than not, by a significant number, chose to have a child, whether that was by rape, whether that was by incest, regardless of the personal risk that many of them had to assume. And now, admittedly, before the Dobbs ruling, that personal risk was mitigated by having access to OBGYNs and labor and delivery nurses and doctors that had the flexibility to make an emergency decision without being second guessed by individuals who are neither healthcare providers, OBGYNs, or otherwise family physicians. So in a lot of ways, I see the return to the choice being more of a cultural issue. And the state has a responsibility to make sure that the opportunity to raise said child is available to the mother in such a way where she doesn't feel responsible for a choice that she'd rather not make. We want to give her essentially the rights of widows and orphans, the security to be raised in a safe environment here in the state of Idaho. Anyway, that's my particular position on it. So we've been here about an hour now. Is there anything else you guys want to cover real quick? You know, spend another 15 minutes or so? It's been a heavy night already, hasn't it, Justin?
Yeah, it's been pretty heavy. I think we covered a lot of it, and I mean the only thing we didn't really cover was having Justin talk a little bit about himself, you know, where he comes, everything like that is what I would say.
I'm originally from Colorado, born and raised there. Had the same problems there that I see happening here. This is early 90s. A lot of the small farms got bought out. Big houses went in. Made it very hard to be able to sell enough animals, hay, stock, whatever you want to call it, in order to survive. So yeah, ended up having to fold up our little family farm ranch thing that I grew up on. My mother moved out to this area where her family is all from. And my dad went to New Mexico, and I kind of just stayed in Colorado for a few years. But then I moved out here. When I helped finish move my mom out here, she was like, "Why don't you go down to the school here? It's CSI, and see what it'd take to get, you know, some college." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know." So I went down, visited CSI, and decided I'd hang out up here for a while. That was back in '94. Went to CSI for a few years, got my welding degree. During that time, I joined Rock Creek Fire right here in Kimberly, where I'm from now. Served with them for many years, made fire captain, trained some of the guys that are there now as full-time professional firefighters. So, you know, it's kind of cool to see my community grow, and that the effort I put in back when we were volunteers has paid off with a really, really strong fire department here. Shout out to them. Anyways, went to work at Longview back in '99, worked there 16 years, went over to Jerome Peterbilt, worked over there for 6 years. A buddy of mine from Longview, West Rock, Capstone, it's been a lot of things. Now it's Smurf at West Rock. Called me back, was like, "Hey, we really need a good mechanic. Are you able to come over?" Went over, interviewed, talked to him, decided I'd move back over there, and I've been there since. Decided I'd run for governor about July, August of last year, just because I was tired of how the government is run, to be honest with you. Started looking into it, and there are so many ways the governor himself can implement plans, simple plans, and they're all on my site, idahoansfirst.com. That's where you'll find every plan, most of my opinions on things. I have put it all out there for the public to see, so they can see where I stand, see how I see the government could be improved. 4 huge pillars. It's kind of my running point. Audits, a lot of audits, top to bottom. Get transparency pushed through to where we make government a glass house for all of our citizens. Make citizens task force so that instead of one set of eyes looking for the crack in the dam, we have hundreds of thousands of eyes looking at the dam, and a place for the person that spots it to actually be able to put in that info and make it work for the people of Idaho. And the last one of my four main pillars is accountability, which we have to hold the people in charge accountable. And that's why I put everything I have out there, so that if and when I become elected governor, they can go, hey, why aren't you doing this? And I have to actually answer to the people why such an easy thing has not been done or doesn't get done under me, which obviously it's going to get done, or I wouldn't have spent the time getting it. So that's basically my thoughts. I just really want to state where my kids and their kids can afford a house, have a good job, a good career, good education, good roads to drive on. I mean, it's all the little entities that the governor's in charge of that we just keep see crumble a little bit here, a little bit there, year after year. And really, with the research I've done, it's not that hard to fix it. You just got to make it transparent. You got to find the holes, plug the holes, and hold the people that made the holes accountable.
Sounds good. So is Justin Solja, he's available, his site, website, idahoansfirst.com. Go to that. He's got a similar handle for his Twitter, Idahoan Twitter at idahoansfirst. Joe, go ahead and tell us about your site, your access, where they can find out more about you.
Yeah. So Joe, Morrison for Idaho. That's Morrison, the number 4 ID.com is my website. And that has a lot of my platform on there as well. 8 pillars. What I really want to see from the government that is for the people. I feel like a lot of my issues resonate with Justin Plant in regards to cost of housing. It's these little nicks and crannies that we're seeing, and they're just getting worse and worse and worse. And we really need to step up and make it accountable to we the people. Public service, nothing should be private in public service. Everything should be private as a private citizen, in my opinion. Is more or less one of my key things I say. Yeah, I spent some summers out there in Magic Valley. I really liked it out there. Beautiful area. Just side note, it's I worked on a farm out there in Hazelton, Eden, Idaho area. So yep. I spent 3 summers out there growing up. I really do like the Magic Valley, though. It's a great area. It's a phenomenal area, and I like to keep it that way. I'd like to keep it in a way where our future generations can be proud to be American and Idahoans.
Yeah. So this is the second one I've done here. Second one with Joe as well. Last time we had the other candidate from Congressional District 1. Why am I drawing a blank on his name right now?
Andy Briner.
Yeah. So again, this isn't limited to just us. We welcome anybody who wants to come in and have this discussion with us. You can reach out to myself or Joe Morrison. Get on the list. We're going to be doing this on a reasonably regular basis. Once, if we start seeing enough interest, maybe twice a week, where we sit down and we have these town halls where we toss around the ideas as far as what we can do at the different levels. So don't think we're being stingy here. Don't think we're locking anybody out. We want everybody to have access to this. We want everybody to be able to state their feelings about what's going on, and be able to have that conversation, be able to answer your questions in real time. As we've seen happen tonight, Donna, David Draper, we've had several other people come into the discussion as well, ask their questions. So stay in touch, keep an eye out for when we do the updates, when we schedule them. We'll set up the appointment so that you know when to show up for these live town halls. And hopefully we'll start seeing more and more individuals start to appear and be part of this preparation for the May 19th election. And our big election is the primary. That's May 19th. Okay, we are 60 days out right now. Okay, if you're really interested in seeing any of us in November, you need to show up at the May 19th election, check our block, move us into the running for the general election. But our big election right now, May 19th. Pay attention. Let us know what you think. In the meantime, all of you have a great evening. Take care.
You as well. Thank you.
God bless you guys.